Well, thank everyone for showing up. Uh, I served in Vietnam in 1966, and when I got back, I followed the literature of the war very carefully and eventually ended up teaching a course at Ithaca College on the Vietnam War. And by that time, there was a rumor floating around that when General Creighton Abrams went back to Vietnam after many, many years, he was the man who replaced General Westmoreland. He discovered that his closest aide, a South Vietnamese officer, was a Vietnamese agent. Now, I don't know whether that was true, and the last thing I discovered in looking it up on the internet was that they have found no evidence that that was true. Of course, they wouldn't, would they? The protagonist of this wonderful novel, The Sympathizer, by Viet Thanh Nguyen. The protagonist is a North Vietnamese spy working as a close aide to a three-star general in the South Vietnamese Army. And when the novel opens, as Saigon is falling in 1975, the CIA helps to get the general and his wife and some of their family and the protagonist, a good friend of his, safely out of the country and eventually back in the United States. I say back because the protagonist, it turns out, has been educated in the United States. So this chapter starts out with our protagonist back in the United States being invited by the great movie producer, turned out to be Francis Ford Coppola, but he was making Apocalypse Now, reading his script and giving input to it. We own the day. Charlie owns the night. Never forget that. These are the words that blonde 21-year-old Sergeant Jade Bellamy hears on her first day in the torrid tropics of Nam from his new commanding officer, Captain Will Seamus. Seamus was baptized in the blood of his own comrades on the beaches of Normandy. He survived another near-death experience under a Chinese human wave attack in Korea, and then he hauled himself up the ranks on a pulley oiled with Jack Daniels. He knows he'll not ascend any higher, not with his Bronx manners and his big knobby knuckles over which no velvet gloves will fit. This is a political war, he informs his acolyte, the words emanating from behind a smoke screen produced by his Cuban cigar. But all I know is a killing war. His task? To save the prelapsarian Montagnards of a bucolic hamlet perched on the border of wild Laos. What's threatening them is the Viet Cong, not just any Viet Cong. This is the baddest of the bad. King Kong. King Kong will die for his country, which is more than said for most Americans. More important, King Kong will kill for his country, and nothing makes King Kong lick his lips like the ferric scent of a white man's blood. King Kong stalked the dense jungle around the hamlet with veteran guerrillas, battle-wizened men and women who have slaughtered Frenchmen from the highlands to the street without joy. What's more, King Kong has infiltrated the hamlets with subversives and sympathizers, friendly faces, only masks for calculating wills. Standing against them are the hamlet's popular forces, a ragtag bunch of farmers and teenagers, Vietnam's own Minutemen, trained by a dozen Green Berets of the U.S. Army Special Forces AT. This isn't enough, Sergeant Bellamy thinks, alone in his watchtower at midnight. He's dropped out of Harvard, run from his St. Louis home, his millionaire daddy and his fur-cloaked mother. This is enough. This stunningly beautiful jungle and these humble, simple people. This is where I, J. Bellamy, make my first and maybe my last stand at the Hamlet. Well, this at any rate was my interpretation of the screenplay mailed to me by the director's personal assistant. The thickish manila envelope arriving with my name misspelled in a beautifully cursive hand. This was the first whiff of trouble. The second being how the personal assistant, Violet, did not even bother to say hello or goodbye when she called for my mailing information and to arrange a meeting with the director in his Hollywood Hills home. When Violet opened the door, she continued with her bewildering manner of discourse in person. Glad to see you could make it. Heard a lot about you. Loved your notes on the Hamlet. That's precisely how she spoke, trimming pronouns and periods as if punctuation and grammar were wasted on me. Then, without deigning to make eye contact, she inclined her head in a gesture of condescension and disdain, signaling me to enter. Perhaps her abruptness was merely part of her personality, for she had the appearance of the worst kind of bureaucrat, the aspiring one, from blunt, square haircut to blunt, clean fingernails to blunt, efficient pumps. But perhaps it was me, still morally disoriented from the crapulent major's death, as well as the apparition of his severed head at a wedding banquet. Remember, he's a North Vietnamese spy. When he got back to the United States, eventually, the general got word that there must be a mole somewhere in the South Vietnamese community that they were part of. And to try to cover himself, our protagonist suggested it might be the major. He was a heavy drinker and not very competent, a member of the intelligence service. The result was eventually the general had his aide take charge of the assassination. He didn't do it himself. He had his good friend do it, but he was responsible for the killing of the general that he knew was innocent. And the event poisoned his life afterwards. So perhaps it was me, still morally disoriented from the crapulent major's death, as well as the apparition of the severed head at a wedding banquet. The emotional residue of that night was like a drop of arsenic falling into the still waters of my soul, nothing having changed from the taste of it, but everything now tainted. So perhaps that's why I crossed over the threshold into the marble foyer. I instantly suspected that the cause of her behavior was my race. What she saw when she looked at me must have been my yellowness, my slightly smaller eyes, and the shadow cast by the ill fame of the Oriental's genitals, those supposedly minuscule privates disparaged on many a public restroom walls by semi-illiterates. I might have been just half Asian. He was half Asian. He was half Vietnamese and half French. His father was a French priest. I might have been just half Asian, but in America, it was all or nothing when it came to race. You were either white or you weren't. Funnily enough, I never felt inferior because of my race during my foreign student days. I was foreign by definition, therefore was treated as a gift. But now, even though I was a card-carrying American with a driver's license, social security card, and resident alien permit, Violet still considered me as foreign. And this misrecognition punctured the smooth skin of my self-confidence. Was I just being paranoid? That all-American characteristic. Maybe Violet was stricken with color blindness, the willful inability to distinguish between white and any other color, the only infirmity Americans wished for themselves. But as she advanced along the polished bamboo floor, steering clear of the dusty maid who was vacuuming the Turkish rug, I just knew it could not be so. The flawlessness of my English didn't matter, even as she could hear me. She still saw right through me, or perhaps saw someone else instead of me. Her retinas burned with the images of all the castrati dreamed up by Hollywood to steal the place of real Asian men. Here, I speak of those cartoons named Fu Manchu, Charlie Chan, Number One Son, Pop Sing, Pop Sing, and the buck-toothed bespectacled Jack, not so much played as mocked by Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. The performance was so insulting, it even deflated my fetish for Audrey Hepburn, understanding as I did her implicit endorsement of this loathsome. By the time I sat down opposite the director in his office, I was seething from the memory of all these previous wounds, although I did not show it. On the one hand, I was sitting for a meeting with the famed auteur, when once I was just another lovelorn movie fan, passing Saturday afternoon in the cinematic bliss of matinee screenings from which I emerged, blinking and slightly shocked into sunlight at the as bright as the fluorescent bulbs of a hospital birthing room. On the other hand, I was flummoxed by having read the screenplay whose greatest special effect was neither the blowing up of various things nor the evisceration of various bodies, but the achievement of narrating a movie about our country, Vietnam, where not a single one of our countrymen had an intelligible word to say. Violet had scraped my already chafed ethnic sensitivity even further, but since it would not do to make my irritation evident, I forced myself to smile and do what I did best, remaining unreadable as a paper package wrapped up with a string. The auteur studied me, this extra who had crept into the middle of his perfect movie. A golden Oscar statuette exhibited itself on the side of his telephone, serving as either a kingly scepter or a mace for braining impertinent screenwriters. A hirsute show of manliness ruffled along his forearms, and from his collar of his shirt, reminding me of my own relative hairlessness, my chest, stomach, and buttocks as streamlined and glabrous as a Ken doll. Ah, great to meet you, the auteur began. Loved your notes. How about something to drink? Coffee, tea, water, soda, scotch? Never too early for scotch. Violet, some scotch. Ice. I said ice. Well, no ice then. Me too. Always neat for me. Look at my view. No, not the gardener. Jose. Jose! Got to pound on the glass to get his attention. He's half deaf. Jose, move over. You're blocking the view. Good. See the view I'm talking about? The Hollywood sign right there? Never get tired of it. Like the word of God. Just dropped down, plunked on the hills, and the word was Hollywood. Didn't God say that their light was first? And what's a movie but light? Can't have a movie without light. And then words. See, that sign reminds me to write every morning. What? Oh, all right, so it doesn't say Hollywood anymore. You got me. Good eye. Things falling to pieces. One O's half off and the other's falling altogether. Word's gone to shit. But so what? You still got the meaning. Thanks, Violet. Cheers. How do they say it in your country? I said, how do they say it? Yo, 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 is it? I like that. Easy to remember. Yo, 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 then. And here's to the Congress for sending you my way. You're my first Vietnamese, the first I've ever met. Not too many of you in Hollywood. Hell, there's none of you in Hollywood. And authenticity is important. Not that an authenticity beats imagination. The story still comes first. The universality of the story has to be there, but it doesn't hurt to get the details right. I had a Green Beret who actually fought with the Montagnard, and he vetted the script. He found me. He had a screenplay. Everybody's had a screenplay. He can't write. But he's a real American hero. 2 tours of duty, killed DC with his bare hands, Silver Star, Purple Heart, Oakley clusters. You should have seen the Polaroids he showed me. Made my stomach turn. Gave me some ideas, though, for how to shoot the movie. Hardly had any corrections to make. What do you think of that? Took me a moment to realize that he was asking me a question. I was disoriented, as if I were English as a second language speaker, listening to an equally foreign speaker from another country. That's great, I said. You bet it's great. You, on the other hand, you wrote me another screenplay in the margins. You ever read a screenplay before? Took me another moment to realize there was another question. Like Violet, he had a problem with conventional punctuation. No, I didn't think so. Why do you think? Well, but you didn't get the details. I didn't get the details right. Vile, hear that? I researched your country, my friend. I read Joseph Buttinger and Francis Fitzgerald. Have you read Joseph Buttinger and Francis Fitzgerald? He's the foremost historian on your little part of the world. And she won the Pulitzer Prize. She dissected your psychology. I think I know something about you people. His aggressiveness flustered me. My flustering, which was something I wasn't accustomed to, only flustered me further, which was my only explanation for my forthcoming behavior. You didn't even get the screams right, I said. Excuse me? I waited for an interjection till I realized he was just interrupting me with a question. All right, I said, my string starting to unravel. If I remember correctly, pages 26, 42, 58, 77, 91, 103, and 118, basically all the places in the script where one of my people has a speaking part, he or she screams. No words, just screams. So you should at least get the screams right. Screams are universal. Am I right, Violet? You're right, she said from where she sat next to me. No, screams are not universal, I said. If I took this telephone cord and wrapped it around your neck and pulled it tight until your eyes bugged out and your tongue turned black, Violet's scream would sound very different from the scream that you'd be trying to make. Those are two very different kinds of terror coming from a man and a woman. The man knows he's dying. The woman fears she's likely to die soon. Their situations and their bodies produce a qualitative different timbre to their voice. One must listen to them carefully to understand that while pain is universal, it is not utterly private. We cannot know whether our pain is, it is also utterly private. We cannot know whether our pain is like anyone else's pain unless we talk about it. And once we do that, we speak. We think in ways cultural and individual. In this country, for example, someone fleeing for his life will think he should call for the police. It's a reasonable way to cope with the threat of pain. But in my country, no one calls for the police, since it's often the police who inflict pain. Now I write Violet. Violet mutely nodded her head. So let me just point out that in the script you have my people scream the following way. Aye! For example, when villager number 3 is impaled by a Viet Cong punching trap, this is how he screams. Or when a little girl sacrifices her life to alert the Green Berets and that the Viet Cong are sneaking into the village, this is how she screamed before her throat's cut. But having heard many of my countrymen screaming in pain, I can assure you that this is not how they scream. Would you like to hear how they scream? His apple bobbed as he swallowed. Oh, okay. I stood up and leaned on the desk to look him right into his eyes. I didn't see him. What I saw was the face of a wiry Montagnard, an elder of the Brew minority, who lived in an actual hamlet not far from the setting of this fiction. Rumor had it that he served as a liaison agent for the Viet Cong. I was on my first assignment as a lieutenant and couldn't figure out a way to save the man from my captain, wrapping a strand of rusted barbed wire around his throat, the necklace tight enough so that each time he swallowed, the wire tickled his Adam's apple. Remember, Our protagonist is a North Vietnamese spy. He knows that this man that his captain is killing is a commoner. Can't do anything about it. That was not what made the old man scream, however. It was just the appetizer. In my mind, though, as I watched the scene, I screamed for him. Here's what it sounds like, I said, reaching across the desk to pick up the auteur's Mont Blanc fountain pen. I wrote poetically across the cover page of the screenplay in big black letters. Ah! Then I tapped his pen, put it back on his leather writing pad, and said, "That's how we scream in my country." After I descended from the auteur's home to the general's, 30 blocks distant and down the hills, the Hollywood flatlands, I reported my first experience with the motion picture industry to the general and madam, both of whom were infuriated on my behalf. My meeting with the auteur and Violet had gone on for a while longer, mostly in a more subdued fashion, with me pointing out the lack of speaking parts to Vietnamese people in a movie set in Vietnam might be interpreted as cultural insensitivity. True, Violet interjected, but what it boils down to is who pays for the tickets and goes to the movies. Frankly, Vietnamese audiences aren't going to watch this movie, are they? I contained my outrage. Even so, I said, do you not think that it would be a little more believable, a little more realistic, a little more authentic for a movie set in a certain country, for the people in that country to have something to say, instead of having your screenplay direct, as it does now, cut to villagers speaking in their own language? Do you think it might not be decent to let them actually say something instead of simply acknowledging that there is some kind of sound coming from their mouths? Could you not even just have them speak a heavily accented English, what I mean, ching chong English, just to pretend that they're speaking in an Asian language that somehow American audiences can strangely understand? And don't you think it would be more compelling if your Green Beret had a love interest? Do these men only love and die for each other? This is the implication, without a woman in the midst. The auteur grimaced. He said, very interesting, great stuff, loved it. But I have a question. What is it? Oh, yes. How many movies have you made? None. Isn't that right? None? Zero, zilch, nada, nothing? However you say it in your language. So thank you for telling me how to do my job. Now get the hell out of my house and come back after you've made a movie or two. Maybe then I'll listen to one or two of your cheap ideas. Why was he so rude? Madam said. Didn't he ask you to give him some comments? Now, he was looking for a yes man. He thought I'd give him a rubber stamp of approval. He thought you were going to fawn over. Well, when I didn't do that, he was hurt. He's an artist. He's got thin skin. Well, so much for your career in Hollywood, the general said. I don't want a career in Hollywood, I said, which was true only to the extent that Hollywood didn't want me. I confessed to being angry with the auteur, but was I wrong in being angry? This was especially the case when he acknowledged he did not even know that Montagnard was simply a French catch-all term for dozens of Highland minorities. What if, I said to him, I wrote a screenplay about the American West and simply called all the natives Indians? You'd want to know whether the cavalry was fighting the Navajo or the Apache or the Comanche, right? Likewise, I would want to know when you say these people are Montagnards, whether we speak of the Brew or the Nung or the Tay. Well, let me tell you a secret. You ready? Here it is. No one gives a shit. Only later, driving away from his house, could I laugh bitterly about how he had bludgeoned me into silence with my own weapon of choice, words. How can I be so dense and deluded? Even the industrious student. As an industrious student, I had read the screenplay in a few hours and then read and rewritten notes for several more hours, all under the misguided idea that my work mattered. I naively believed that I could divert the Hollywood organism from its goal, the simultaneous lobotomization and pickpocketing of the world's audiences. The ancillary benefit was strip mining history, leaving the real history in the tunnels along with the dead and doling out tiny sparks, sparkling diamonds for audiences to gasp over. Hollywood did not just make horror movie monsters. It was its own horror movie monster, smashing me under its foot. I'd failed, and the auteur would make the Hamlet, as he intended, with my countrymen serving merely as raw material for an epic about white men saving good yellow people from bad yellow people. I pitied the French for their naivete in believing they had to visit a country in order to exploit it. Hollywood was much more efficient, imagining the countries it wanted to exploit. I was maddened by my helplessness before the auteur's imagination and machinations. His arrogance marked something new in the world, for this was the first war where the losers would write the history instead of the victors, courtesy of the most efficient propaganda machine ever created, with all due respect to Joseph Goebbels and the Nazis, who never achieved global domination. Hollywood's high priest understood innately the observation of Milton's Satan, that it was better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, better to be a villain loser, an anti-hero, than a virtuous extra so long as one commanded the bright lights and center stage. In his forthcoming Hollywood triumph, all the Vietnamese of any side would come out poorly, herded in their roles of the poor, the innocent, the evil, or the corrupt. Our fate was not to be merely mute. We were to be struck dumb. Have some pho, Madame said. It will make you feel better. She had been cooking, and the house smelled of sentiment, a rich aroma of beef broth and star anise I can only describe as a bouquet of love and tenderness, all the more striking because Madame had never cooked before coming to this country. For women of Madame's rarefied class, cooking was one of those functions contracted to other women, along with cleaning, nursing, teaching, sewing, and so on. Everything except the bare biological necessities, which I could not imagine Madame performing, except perhaps for breathing. But the exigencies of exile had made it necessary for Madame to cook, as no one else in the household was capable of anything more than boiling water. In the general's case, even that was beyond him. He could field strip and reassemble an M16 blindfolded. But a gas stove was as perplexing as a calculus equation, or at least he pretended so. Like most of us Vietnamese men, he simply didn't want to be even brushed with domesticity. The only domestic things he did were to sleep and eat, both of which he was better at than me. He finished his pho a good 5 minutes before I did, although my slow speed of consumption was not due to lack of will, but because Madame's pho had dissolved me and transported me back in a time to my mother's household, where she concocted the broth from the gray beef bones given by my father from his leftovers. Usually we ate the pho without the thin slices of beef that were its protein because we were too poor to afford the meat itself, except for those rare occasions when my suffering mother scraped together enough wherewithal. But poor as she was, my mother brewed the most wonderful aromatic soup, and I helped her by charring the ginger and onion that would be plunked into the iron pot for flavor. It was also my task to skim the scum that boiled to the top of the broth as the bones simmered, leaving the broth clear and rich. As the bones continued to simmer for hours, I tortured myself by doing my homework by the pot, the aroma taunting and tantalizing. Madame's foe harkened back to the warmth of my mother's kitchen. It was probably not as warm as it was in my memories, but never mind. I had to stop periodically to savor not only the soup, but the marrow of my memories. Delicious, I said. I haven't had this in years. Isn't it amazing? The general said. I never suspected she had this talent. You should open a restaurant, I said. Ah, the way you talk. She was clearly pleased. Have you seen this? The general pulled a newspaper from the stack that was on the kitchen countertop. The latest edition of Sonny's bi-weekly paper. Sonny, we met earlier in the novel, is another South Vietnamese escapee, and he's established his own newspaper here in the United States. I hadn't seen it yet, but what disturbed the general was Sonny's article on the major's funeral, now a few weeks past, and the coverage of the wedding. On the major's demise, Sonny wrote, "The police call this a robbery homicide. But are we sure an officer of the secret police was without enemies who might want him dead?" And in regards to the wedding, Sonny summarized the speeches and concluded by observing that perhaps it's time for a talk of war to cease. Isn't the war over? He's doing what he's supposed to be doing, I said, even though I knew he had gone too far. But I agree, he may be a little naive. Huh. Is it naivete? That's a generous reading. He's supposed to be a reporter. That means to report the facts and not to make things up or interpret them or put ideas in people's heads. He isn't wrong about the major, is he? Whose side are you on? Madam said, completely shedding the role of cook. Reporters need editors, and editors need beatings. That's the best newspaper policy. The problem with Son is that he's his own editor and he goes unchecked. Ah, you're absolutely right, madam. The auteur's punch had unnerved me, knocking me out of character. Too much freedom of the press is unhealthy for democracy, I declared. Well, I did not believe this. My character, the good captain, certainly did. And as the actor playing his role, I had to sympathize with this man. But most actors spent more time with their masks off than on. Whereas in my case, it was the reverse. No surprise then that sometimes I dreamed of trying to pull the mask off my face, only to realize that the mask was my face. Now, with the face of the captain readjusted for proper fit, I said, the citizenry can't sift out what is useful and good if there's too much opinion circulating. No more than two opinions or ideas on any one issue should be out there, the general said. Look at the voting system. Same concept. We had multiple parties and candidates, and look at the mess we had. Here, you choose the left hand or the right hand. No more than that. Two choices, and look at all the drama with every presidential election. Even two choices, maybe one too many. One choice is enough, and no choice may be even better. Less is more, isn't it? You know the man, Captain, talking about Sonny. He'll listen to you, remind him of how we did things back home. Even though we're here, we still need to remember the way we did things. Of course, any one of the South Vietnamese people who got a visit from the general's primary aide, warning him to be stepped over the pond, be a bone-chilling experience. In the good old days, Sonny would already be sweating in a holding cell. Out loud, I said, speaking of the old days, sir, are we making any progress on winning them back? Well, progress is being made, the general said. We've made friends and allies in Claude and the congressman. Claude was the CIA operative who helped get them out of Vietnam. He too was, of course, back in the United States. And they tell me that they're not alone. The congressman is a congressman from California who's extreme right wing and pro Vietnam War. And he's helping to organize things so that perhaps that's kind of a return. But it's a difficult time for getting support publicly, since the American people don't want to fight another war. Well, we have to assemble ourselves, slowly. But we need a network here and there, I suggest. Well, I have a list of officers for our first meeting. I've called to all of them in person, and they're dying for a chance to fight. There's nothing for them here. The only chance for them to regain their honor and be men again is to reclaim our country. But we need more than a vanguard. Vanguard said, that's communist talk. Maybe so, but the communists won, madam. They weren't just lucky. Perhaps we should learn from some of their strategies. A vanguard could lead the rest of the people toward where it is they don't even know they want to go, but they should go. He's right, the general said. The vanguard works clandestinely, but sometimes shows the public a different face. Voluntary organizations and the like become the fronts for the vanguard, exactly, the general said. And look at Sun. We need to make his newspaper one of the front organizations. And we need a youth group, a women's group, maybe an intellectuals group. We also need cells. Parts of organizations need to be secluded from one another so that if one cell is lost, others can survive. This is one cell right here. And there are cells like Claude and the congressman are involved in that I know nothing about. In due time, Captain, one step at a time. Congressman is working on certain contacts to clear the way for us to send men to Thailand. That will be the staging area. Exactly. A return by sea is too difficult. We have to go overland back into the country. Meanwhile, Claude is finding us money. Money can get us the rest of what we need. We can get the men. They will need weapons, training, and a place to train. They'll need transport to Thailand. We must think like communists, as you say. We must plan far ahead for decades. We must live and work underground as they did. At least they're already acquainted with darkness. Thank you.
Thank you.